Good morning, brothers and sisters in Christ, and happy 10th Friday of Ordinary Time. So, within the context of the Sermon on the Mount, this is Jesus' beautiful teaching about our eternal destiny of happiness and beatitude with God. Jesus also speaks about hell. In the Gospel today, he refers to this place called Gehenna, and elsewhere he says it's a place of unquenchable fire. Brothers and sisters, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I just want to take a minute to talk a little bit about hell. So some people say, well, hell doesn't exist. What are you talking about? That's just an archaic idea made up in the Middle Ages in order to scare people. Well, let me read for you from the Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1035. Here it says, the teaching of the Church affirms the existence of hell and its eternity. So brothers and sisters, the basic idea is this. Jesus speaks about hell, talks about a Gehenna, a place of unquenchable fire. And because Jesus taught it, we believe it. And now it forms what's called a de fide teaching of the Catholic Church. Some people say, okay, well maybe hell exists, but God would never send anybody to hell. Well, that's a very interesting objection, and there is a distinction and a nuance we need to make. So let's go back to the Catechism and see what that's about. It says in paragraph 1033, to die in mortal sin without repenting and accepting God's merciful love means remaining separated from Him forever by our own free choice. The state of definitive self-exclusion from communion with God and the blessed is called hell. And so, brothers and sisters, this is important. It's true, God doesn't send anybody to hell, not in the strict sense. We, brothers and sisters, choose hell by our own free choices. And our choice is not to love God and not to love neighbor. So the key word that the Catechism uses is self-exclusion. God respects our freedom. He gave us freedom. Why? So that we could choose Him, to love Him and to love our neighbor. But when we don't use our freedom to love God and to love neighbor, God respects that. And the place reserved for those who do not love God and love neighbor definitively, unrepentantly, is called hell. So yeah, God doesn't send anybody to hell, strictly speaking. But for those who choose hell, He lets them go there. Now, lastly, some people will say, okay, well, who would actually choose hell, though? I mean, after I die, I'm going to see Jesus, and it's all going to be okay then. He'll forgive me, and I'll tell Him I love Him, and everything's going to be just fine. Well, brothers and sisters, let's go back to the Catechism, because this is a very popular idea, but it's actually not true. After we die, there's not going to be a big makeup session with Jesus. We go to the Catechism, we go to an earlier section on what's called the particular judgment, and this is what it says. Death puts an end to human life as the time open to either accepting or rejecting the divine grace manifested in Christ. Each will be rewarded immediately after death in accordance with his works and faith. And so, brothers and sisters, what this teaching is reminding us is that the choices we make here and now on earth, once we die, become eternal choices. So if our life is ordered towards God, loving Him, serving Him as best we can, keeping in mind nobody's perfect, but we do our best, and we love God, and we make use of the grace available to us through the Catholic Church, and if we do that, then we can, with trust and confidence in God, know that when we die, that eternal choice to love Him will be made manifest with our entrance into heaven. But if we don't love God and love neighbor, when we die, that choice against God and against neighbor becomes an eternal one. And so it's not as though we can just say, oh, I messed up, Lord, after death. Will you forgive me now? Because once we die, strictly speaking, it's too late. And so, brothers and sisters, once again, I'm not trying to scare anybody, but I think it's important to talk about this reality of hell and how it is that one ends up there, so to speak. Jesus speaks about it in the gospel. And so the invitation for us is to use our freedom. Once again, keeping in mind, we're not perfect. We'll never be perfect. But we need to do our very best with everything in our control to choose God, to love God, and to love neighbor. To avail ourselves of God's grace, which He bestows upon us, first and foremost, in the Catholic Church, the sacramental life, and the life of prayer. And so let's ask Mother Mary to fill us not with fear that we'll be punished and sent to hell one day, but with lots of hope and love for God that we can choose Him here and now in this world so that we can enjoy that beatitude with Him forever in heaven.